Go.
Welcome to episode 1 of League of Our Own, League of Legends talk show. I'm Pr0nogo, and with me to my left or right, who knows, it's a mystery, is Leo Tsukiyo.
What's up,
And
guys?
on this episode of the show, we'll be discussing Worlds 2017, specifically the groups play-in stage that already happened at this point. We'll talk about the teams that got out, and then we'll talk about probably some sad stories about the teams that didn't get out and our predictions for
Yep.
the group stage itself. So we'll just get right into it, and hopefully uh, we can deliver you guys some insightful insight
Insightful
because
insight. I like it.
it's really lacking. I mean, talk shows are definitely something that League needs more of. We hardly have any good talk shows. It's not like Thorn's running like 3 and then we've got 10 others from other people. There's not like a new one just came out that talks. It's like a phone call-in show. I mean,
Oh
that
yeah.
doesn't happen. There's just no content creators in the League of Legends scene. Honestly, it's the biggest game, but no content. So that's what we're here to fix. So if you definitely don't subscribe to anybody else, because it's definitely not the case that there's about 10 million other talk shows out there, then you can definitely subscribe to this channel because
Yeah,
this is talk.
absolutely. It's
Yeah,
it's not like we're just the drop in the bucket, folks. We're the real
yeah,
deal. We're the ocean, baby. All right, the ocean.
exactly.
You have to immerse yourself in this. We're gonna give you the facts. You just gotta bathe in them. All right.
Yeah, listen to the man on the left or right. So I guess we'll just give a quick rundown of the teams that got out of the play-in stage. That's
All
not
right.
Cloud9. No, I'm just kidding. Cloud9 didn't make it out. So it was Cloud9. It was Fnatic. It was
Yeah.
1907 Fenerbahce
Yeah.
from Turkey. And then the other seed was Team World Elite from LPL. So those have been sorted. And there are, well, the group stage went well, the group draw to
Yeah.
draft everybody in. I'm sure everybody was exactly hoping for World Elite to end up where they wound up. So that was great.
Honestly, that was probably the best outcome considering for Group D specifically, there was like no final boss, no Korean team, and everybody was speculating like, if World Elite gets in there, it'll be the most competitive that it could possibly be. Um, and I'm excited for it because I think World Elite is pretty great. I do have some reservations, but I'll get into them in a little bit. But you know what I noticed from all the teams that have rose up from the play-in stage is we have Turkey again, and then we have every third seed that didn't automatically qualify for the group stage. So proving that the major regions, I guess, rose above and did what they had to do, showed up and got into groups.
If it wasn't for Brazil's success in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years, I probably would have to wonder, like ponder at the success of Turkey. Time and time again, they have gotten a team into the world stage. With the exception of last year's Worlds, I think was the only one that they missed, unless they missed. I think they might have missed. Yeah, they missed the 2014 one too. The one where was that 2014? It might have been 2015. It's the one where SKT Faker played Olaf mid in one of
Oh,
the worst games I've ever seen at Worlds, actually.
it
So
had to be 2015 then, because if I
yeah,
remember correctly, I think SKT didn't even make Worlds in 2014. Like,
yeah, that was the one that Samsung won. So that one we didn't have a wild card team from Turkey. We had one for it was what was that team? It was like the Bangkok Titans,
oh
and
yeah,
then
that's right. That's
that
where
was
we
the
had
team
the
that got
Olaf
styled on.
Irelia matchup. Yeah,
Yeah, because
that was
everybody was playing Irelia, and everybody forgot that Olaf was a counter to Irelia because she was going mid lane, and you would max Q to bounce around the minions a lot faster, and it's just a goofball meta at that point. The
it
difference
was.
between Worlds 2015 and Worlds 2016, by my estimation, is that in 2015 we had everybody except for SK Telecom playing like absolute shit, and then in 2016, even SK Telecom played like absolute shit. So I don't know what's going to happen in 2015, but so far, or 2017, excuse me, but so far, well, let's just say it's still it's still shit, man.
Honestly, and that's great that SKT is in Group A because I do have a few points that I want to bring up about them when we get there. Because I do
Sure.
predict that it's going to be very feast or famine, and I'll explain why once we get there. But
No, we can just start there. I mean, they're the
all
first
right,
group, anyways. So
all right,
those SKT, like you said, second Korean seed this time around, not the first. They, as we all know, they fell to Longju in the finals. So it's SKT from Korea, and the number one seed is actually EDG from China,
hmm,
and then there's C9 from North America and AHQ from the LMS Taiwan. So Why don't you open us up with SKT's woes or feast or famine discussions, like you hinted at?
Absolutely. You know what it is? This group, I think, has a little bit of leeway in the middle, and I think SKT, and I'm not gonna keep it a secret here. SKT, I think, is gonna emerge number one.
Hmm.
But I do think there's a slight bit of room for variance, and the reason for that is SKT. If we look at them, they had towards the end of the summer split, they had a rough patch where they lost, I believe, like 3 series in a row, and then curiously beat KT out of nowhere to close off their split. But moreover, is while people were questioning how shaky they looked at the end of the summer, they did burst into playoffs. Firstly, playing the wild card match because they were fourth place, right?
Hmm.
Um, Beating who was it? I believe Afrika Freaks, pretty
Yeah,
handedly, and then they ran through every other consequent team, which I believe in order was Samsung Galaxy, followed by KT Rolster. And the KT Rolster series was pretty interesting because if I remember correctly, they won that series 3-2 after KT Rolster won the first 2 games.
it was just a
So,
classic. Like somebody needs to get an emoji out of that that face of that Monty made when he was in all of the KT garb at the end of the finals. That was
uh,
the back in the 3-0 finals back in when KT. I think it was actually before 2016 Worlds when KT had that like they really snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
oh yes,
Just
it
they
was
were a lock for Worlds and then they didn't make it because
it
they got
was an
upset by Samsung immediately afterwards in the gauntlet.
and isn't that kind of poetic? Not to like jump into the future here, since Samsung's in another group, but KT Rolster in the regionals again denied by Samsung Galaxy in a clean 3-0, mind you. It wasn't even like it was the full
Yeah,
five
yeah,
games. It was that's
yeah.
depressing. It's a bad time to be a KT fan. I love
It's
when
been a
people bring it
bad
up.
3 years to be a
Yeah,
KT fan.
my
Even when they made Worlds, they got trounced by the team that they beat the last time when they
yeah,
got beaten by Rocks in 2015, and then since then they've been
having a
crickets.
tough time. A very tough time. My favorite thing is when people are talking about, hey, who's the best top laners at World? And somebody's like, Smeb, oh, wait.
Yeah, well, at Worlds, man, at Worlds, not in Korea.
Exactly. So with SKT though, what was so beautiful about it is that they performed that reverse sweep, but then they hit Longzhu, and everybody was having their questions about Longzhu, right? Because some rookies there in BDD and Khan not having proved themselves before, and SKT crumble 3-1 in this series. They had one game where they looked dominant, admittedly, when they first swapped in Huni, I believe it was game 3, and it looked
I
like
think
it
so.
might have been another reverse sweep, but no, they actually fell. And we'll get to Longzhu eventually. But the purpose of highlighting this is that these Titans are not indomitable this time around, right? It seems like whatever plan they're devising, for some reason, is not coming to fruition. At least it didn't against Longzhu, and it was a close series relatively with KT Rolster, and these are the last 2 showings we've seen from them. So the reason why I think there's room for variance, where I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped a game or two, is because Huni can be incredibly feast or famine in and of himself, but I wouldn't put it past SKT to facilitate this by basically having either hyper aggressive Peanut help the top side of the map in Huni and in Faker, depending on who needs it a little more at whatever given time, or if they swap in Blank because they have Blank and Peanut with them. If they pull a good switcheroo and they have Blank just play this more supportive style, potentially just getting more wards down like he tends to, and supporting every player as they need it, then they might shore up their weakness. The point is, I don't doubt SKT will have a plan, but I do think that Huni can potentially be feast or famine, and therefore it is big variable for them. What do you think about SKT?
Well, my issue is like you can observe flaws in SKT, like what you're describing now. With they did decide to go with Huni, right? They didn't take the other top laner that they have.
Untara,
I
yeah.
forget. Yeah, I thought it was Intara, but then I thought that guy was in Nip or something. It was the
Uh,
other top laner that they
Profit,
had earlier.
Profit.
Profit.
The
What a
old sub
lunatic.
for SKT, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's not profiting from that decision. Let's just say
Definitely not.
relegated. So they have SKT has observable flaws, but the question is really who's gonna be able to challenge them. I think Huni. I'm surprised they actually took Huni over Antara. I guess that series where Huni was humbled right by the fact that his play against Khan wasn't as sufficient, to
Yeah.
get them another win basically. And it's funny because everybody who joins SKT in the past couple of years, everybody who's joined them has always said like, well, free worlds, but now it's looking like maybe not. And Huni, it might actually be a core reason why SKT could potentially fail to miss the world's finals or just the victory in general, even if they make it there. But the question really is who's going to challenge SKT? Who's going to make these flaws fatal as opposed to just existing?
Well,
And I think the issue really is that Faker's probably going to outclass any mid laner in this. I don't see either of AHQ's mid laners going up against him, although there is that famous outplay from 2015 Worlds where
uh,
the famous Fizz pick managed to conquer him when that first opening game of their best of three. But after that, Westor seemed to fizzle out from
yes,
the entire series as was expected when you
very
solo
good,
kill
very good.
the main guy. Yeah, not really a reference game, but I can quote Thorin and say reference game incredibly. The you've got the whole Fizz thing going on there that was able to beat them, but Fizz is. I mean, it's not like Fizz being out of meta has ever stopped Westor, but this isn't a talk about Westor. We'll get there.
All right.
The idea that Westor, I don't think the other HQ guy is going to be there. I forget his name. And then you got Jensen. Presumably, there's one of two ways I see Jensen and C9 as a whole approaching mid lane, the matchup against SKT. Either you've got Jensen with, he's a mechanical, very decent mechanical player. Obviously, everybody was saying, hey, maybe he should have gotten MVP instead of Bjergsen for the umpteenth time. And I mean, I would argue that Bjergsen did a pretty decent job of at least putting himself in that discussion. But everybody was saying, see, Jensen is no pushover. I mean, he's seriously in contention. So if they're to be trusted and he passes the eye test as he does, you'd think Jensen maybe he can hold up mechanically. But maybe they decide, all right, why don't you just let Faker roll over you a little bit and seed some CS when necessary and play a little bit safer than you would against other mid laners. And then we can focus on getting you to the other lanes to help snowball, as opposed to basically focusing on mechanics to just challenge Faker. You let yourself focus on more of the macro side so that you don't challenge Faker and he takes more than, he takes a mile with that inch that you give him. But you try to mitigate that as much as possible so that you can then have Jensen affect the side lanes, as C9 typically like to do. He's pretty, he's been vaunted for his roams this last split and probably the last season as well overall. So you think about Jensen like that, you think about the mid lane matchup there, but even then those aren't ways to beat Faker. Those are ways to mitigate his damage that he does to you.
You're trying to
And
circumvent what Faker does.
yeah, you can't really like counter him in his own style, or there's not really. I don't think that C9 will attempt to draft like around Faker as if he were a weakness. Is the key thing. It's
Oh,
not
definitely
like
not.
that crazy, eighth dimensional chess that EDG pulled at MSI 2015 when they grabbed the Morgana top and Evelyn jungle and whatever else. Like that was just insane. I didn't, when they baited him into that LeBlanc pick and eventually took the series. That was obviously history. That was his first competitive loss on LeBlanc. So you can see where there's an element of where like, oh, there's maybe something we can take. But even then, that was like a crazy weakness to exploit. That was so niche. And now you've really got not really, you can't really do that again, right? He's savvy to that. And none of the other counters that EDG used are in meta anyways. So unless you're going to pick like Galio and try to hold on in mid lane, I don't really see much of a way to like mitigate some sort of damage that Faker's going to do from any of these teams, including EDG. So yeah, SKT, maybe they have an observable flaw in the top lane, but despite the fact that Longzhu proved that gods and unkillable demon kings from the pits of hell can bleed, you still have the unkillable demon king from the pit of hell. So I don't really know how you get around that. Like, you're not Longzhu Gaming, you're Cloud9 or your EDG or your AHQ. These three teams, I don't know if they have what it takes to really challenge them. But that being said, it is best of one. So
I mean, ultimately, any of these teams can pull out a really good draft or a good game plan just generally for the best of one, right? And then they can come out on top. I will say, however, if anyone could contend with SKT, and I'm saying could contend very loosely here, because I don't really believe that EDG and C9 are on the same caliber as SKT, but at the same time, I have an exceptionally low opinion of AHQ, and I'll get into that in a second. I'm going to discuss them last because I have a negative opinion. But when it comes down to EDG, there's there's some neat storylines that go down in this group, right? We have the whole concept of when Jensen was like, I'm going to clap Faker, and now he's going to get a chance to redeem himself
Right.
and actually go toe to toe with him. I do think that Jensen's mechanical prowess is not to go unspoken. Do I think it's enough to upset Faker? Definitely not. Faker's in a caliber of his own, and even when Faker plays bad, it's still better than a lot of other pro players. So ultimately, if anybody's going to plan to do anything, I think C9 could develop an advantage kind of in like a top jungle scenario. And I feel more so they could take advantage of that if Peanut is playing. And I know that sounds really bizarre because Peanut is an aggressive jungler and we know this, but it seems like it's much easier to manipulate or at least to track the patterns of Peanut. Blank is more willing to pull random pathing out of him in order to get to a certain place on the map and take an enemy by surprise. He's more willing to sacrifice, I guess, the health and optimization of his CSN experience if it means making the play elsewhere. And that's what I really like about SKT with Blank. And that's why I do theorize that while we're seeing Huni a lot, maybe Peanut will open up, but I think that Blank will come out when it matters. EDG, though, this is a cool storyline as well. With Scout being their mid laner, he was obviously formerly a sub in the mid lane for SKT a little while ago. I don't remember exactly which split, but he studied under Faker, and he's been a core component to EDG. However, he's been responsible for a lot of carries. He's also been responsible for a lot of throws. Like he'll be very narrow-sighted. So in other words, if he sees somebody on the map and he's like, you know what, I could outplay this one person, but there's not adequate vision to see somebody else is there, it's almost as if he just makes the play without the sufficient enough information. So he could sometimes put himself in a vulnerable position. So EDG generally as a whole, I kind of question exactly how strong they'll be, especially since Clear Love at previous international tournaments can perform in a very suspect manner. So I do think that either Peanut or Blank would kind of style on Clear Love, uh, depending on which form of him or which rendition he decides to rear out in this tournament. But ultimately, there's just a lot of mid lane talent. I don't really think that the entire roster of EDG can stack up, and the main reason for that is I don't know the relative strength of LPL in actuality. And the reason I say that is because if we track from the playoffs moving forward, in the semifinals, you had World Elite versus RNG. World Elite lost 3 to 2. RNG moved to the finals where they fight EDG. RNG loses 3 to 2 to EDG. Then you have WE when they go to the third, fourth place match, they lose to IG 3 to 2. They go to the Gauntlet. I forget which team they beat first, but they face IG again. IG versus World Elite rematch in the regionals in the finals of that. And WE they win 3 to 2. So all of these top teams are so close, and I don't know if that's because their skill ceiling is exceptionally high, or if there's just like some sort of stagnation at the top. You understand what I mean? I don't know if it's an accurate measure of all of them being top tier as opposed to all of them kind of being stuck around the same level. And I really wouldn't know how to compare that to a Korean team, especially a monster like SKT. When you have Mouse as your top laner, he's not really known for making the plays or being exceptionally mechanically good. So even if Huni's having a bad laning phase per se, you can rely on Huni to kind of back up, like come back into the game later with the help of somebody like Peanut or Blank. Whereas if Clear Love doesn't show up and Mouse doesn't perform, then that top side is basically gone to shit. Um, that's why I'm going to say that I value C9's matchup in SKT a little bit more, considering Impact, even though he hasn't been stellar, has a lot of experience. So going into Huni, maybe Huni will have a little more mechanical prowess, but in the lane, Impact has shown far more than efficiency at being able to manage being ganked, handle the 1v2, get out alive, even if he doesn't get a counter kill. He's very good at navigating those really high pressure situations, which Huni is too, but I do think that C9 have the advantage in the top. So ultimately, I'm going to put it this way. I think that SKT comes out of this group top in number one. I think that C9 and EDG, there's a little room for variance, but I'm leaning towards C9 for the second spot, especially since EDG in the middle of summer, they brought in this player named iBoy. And he's a rookie. I think he just turned 17 when they brought him in, actually, because I think that's the legal age. But, that's untested, never been to an international event. I'm not trying to factor in for variables like jitters and whatnot, but it's a totally different environment playing against the world's best, and especially when different metas collide from different regions and different priority picks exist for these teams. versus when you're in China and you get to play the same competition over and over, watch the VODs, see those teams you're going to face next week, play this week, and study what they're doing already. It's a totally different ball game.
So are you actually coming out and making the bold prediction that it's actually going to be SKT and C9 that make it out of Group A?
I do believe so. Like I said, I'm going to leave a little room for
Yeah.
variance. I wouldn't be surprised if EDG is too, but I'm leaning towards C9. I do think that they have the greater chance.
There's a greater chance. Do you have like a percentage in mind? Is it like 70-30 in favor of C9? Like how
I'll
much variance are you putting?
I'll give it like 65% to 35 roughly, something like that.
Okay. All
I
right,
just
that's. I
think
mean, that
the
that is still pretty bold. A 65% chance. I mean, that is a majority chance that C9 makes it out. So you heard it here first. If C9, when C9 inevitably shits the bed, then you have this man to lose.
I will take the flame. I will gladly take the flame. Speaking
Yeah.
of flame,
Well,
I have to flame
speaking of flame.
AHQ really
Oh,
quickly.
well, here I thought we were transitioning immediately into Group B with Immortals, but you got me with
I
that one. All
I
right, let's talk
was
about.
going to, and then I realized I have to mention them. HQ, it bothers me to know the fact that they will probably be doing really poorly. If they defy this expectation, then I would be happy for them in terms of the competition aspect. But coming from the perspective of looking at the relevant data and the recent match history that they have had, their split, it didn't look too impressive, right? I mean, obviously top four is nothing to shake a leg at. Being in playoffs, great, but they narrowly beat J Team in quarters 3-2. Then they beat Rays Gaming 3-1, and got clean swept by Flash Wolves. So considering that a team like Hong Kong Attitude, who didn't make it out of play-ins, unfortunately, were able to beat AHQ on the later half of the season, I think the
And a best
relative
of three, right? That was during the split.
it was during the split, yes.
Right, so best of three.
I think that I think it speaks to their weakness. While Westor has been trying to learn more meta champions, so to speak, he still has
Other
signature
than
things
Fizz.
like, and he still has those under his belt, like the Fizz and the
Yeah.
Twisted Fate. But he's played a lot of Talia. Um, Chowie is still with them. I'm actually unsure which sub they brought with them to Worlds. I think it might just be Chowie, the alternative mid laner.
Presumably.
Yeah. And I just don't see how the strength of the team is going to add up. Because you look at it, and whether it be Westor or Chowie versus Jensen, Scout, Faker, that's a mismatch, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think any of them really match up. The problem with AHQ, in my opinion, is that it's been the same story since they brought this Chowie guy in, right? Because first it's like, wow, it shows a lot of promise, and then after the promise fades away and you get the CLG propaganda out of your head, and then you realize, oh, this potential was all well, it wasn't fulfilled. First of all, it wasn't realized, and you have this issue where you've got Chowie, you've got Westor, you stopped really using them in the drafts in the same way that you did before, where you'd actually do like red side Chowie, blue side
Yeah,
West, or something like that. You stopped using them in your drafts in the middle of best of threes. So they stopped giving you a unique advantage in, well, as much of a unique advantage as they did in like actual series. Obviously, in best of ones like groups in worlds for some godforsaken reason. Riot can maybe shed some light on why worlds is still a best of one to knock people out, but in this case, I don't think AHQ would put up much of a fight regardless, right? Because you don't really have a lot of strength in series play as opposed to best of ones. I mean, AHQ are basically like riding the. You can't say that AHQ are riding the TSM meme where oh yeah, it's best of one, guys. That's why we got kicked out of groups. Instead of just saying, well, we just suck as a team. But that seems like AHQ compared to the rest of the field. I don't see them holding up very much at all. And the other thing is that talking about what I sort of piggybacking off of the point I made about SKT, where they have mid lane and how well can other teams really make a strategy and execute a strategy that like works around an observable flaw and turns it into something that is a genuine advantage for them. I don't see AHQ doing that. In fact, I don't really see any of the top laners in this group doing that to Huni, besides maybe Impact. I mean, he did trounce him the last time they matched up, but this was like a year ago, obviously. This is
yeah.
before he moved over to SKT, and presumably he's learned a lot. And presumably SKT is comfortable enough with them, given the fact that they took him over in Tara. So, or maybe that was just the only choice they had, because it has to be said, the stupid one sub rule only exists to save North America and Europe from the monsters of Europe, or rather China and just Asia in general. These Asian regions have so much talent that they can bring. If your name isn't Mouse, then you're probably along for the ride. I mean, could you imagine if they had 2 or 3 subs? We would have seen Tom come along last time around, like
Definitely.
back in 2015. So
There would have
not
been
last.
so much
Yeah.
variance, and it makes the games. And I guess that's the issue, right? When you compound that with the best of one format, and then you have the option of multiple subs, it makes it really hard to do preparation because then you have to figure out exactly what strategy they might be running, which players they might be fielding, and how shuffling those players will affect just the strategy across the map of Summoner's Rift. Also, just pick and ban, generally speaking. You might have a whole entire strategy for pick and ban. You're going to ban out this player against, like, for instance, a Huni, and then you're going to ban this against Peanut, and then all of a sudden you're facing some combination of Huni and Blank and, I don't know, Sky in the mid lane. For whatever reason, they decided to let Faker take a break. Maybe it was the seventh
Well,
day and God
yeah,
needed
but
his rest. Who knows?
Korea already prepares for all this stuff, man.
Absolutely. And
Korea's
I'm not
prepared
trying to
to do
lower the
stuff
bar.
against other teams.
I'm not
Yeah,
trying to lower the bar
what
at
I'm
all.
saying is that regardless of that sub rule, I mean, Huni's not getting subbed out because
No,
the
definitely
only
not.
other sub that they could bring in was Blank and Peanut. Those are the only two people
Yeah.
that they are going to sub one out for the other. So yes, there's an observable flaw in the top lane for SKT, but I don't see any top laner besides maybe Impact that can actually do anything. So I guess, since it is Mouse versus Huni in the top lane matchup for EDG, and Mouse is only really well known for that one game versus Ints where he took their name literally. That was basically it. So
Yeah.
I don't really see much a chance for EDG in the top lane. I think they have to win elsewhere. Their victory condition is probably going to be through like jungle pressure in mid, or
Yeah.
jungle pressure in bot, and they're just going to leave top lane out to dry, presumably. Otherwise, the other lanes are probably going to be lost by default based on the other matchups, and jungle is going to be lost because Tooney's just 1v2ing because Mouse isn't a player. So I don't really know how you stack that up in that favor. I guess I can see in that case it adds more fuel to it adds more truck to your argument, right? Where you have C9 getting out above them, but it would honestly, it would be the biggest meme if top seed from China loses out, and
To
the second seed
yeah.
from Korea and the third seed from North America. I mean, we'd probably never hear the end of it. The only way that would be different if it was like the top EU seed or something. Then
Oh
EU
man.
would really be worse than NA, man. Let me tell you. But that being said, to sort of wrap up this group, the point about China having so much parity was
Yeah.
actually a premise for an article I'm writing, and the idea is that any of the top 4 teams in China could have gone. And the thing is, precisely what the article is all about, to give a minor sort of peek behind the curtain, is you've got China with these 4 teams that went 3-2 in every series, including like these regional series where they
Yeah.
played against each other. So it's like across 5 series, it was 25 games, the full gamut. So how do you have, how does this mean? Like, what does this mean for the international scene? Basically, you've got EDG, and they went 3-2 against RNG in the finals. You got RNG, and obviously they lost 3-2 to EDG, but they also went 3-2 against World Elite, I believe, or
Yeah.
EDG went 3-2 against World Elite, one of the two. And then they had Invictus Gaming 3-2.
Yeah, they were all really
Where
close series, and it makes it really hard to
yeah,
judge exactly. I mean, obviously you judge by the victor in theory, but they're so close that their relative skill, it's almost like you could swap any of them out and it would be nearly the same.
the thing is, the consensus of most experts I've read on this topic is that China is a region to be feared once again, just like seasons 2 and 3, back in the days of like the original Royal Never Give Up Starhorn Royal
Yeah.
Club. Season 4 is even where they were pretty good. So China's a region to be feared at this point, according to most experts. And they're saying, World Elite, top 5 or 6 teams in the entire event, top 8 teams in the event. They should make semis, not just quarters. So in some cases, that's what people are saying. So if that's the case, I mean that is a really strong region. If their third seed can potentially make it all the way to semis, at the very least, is seemingly a lock in most people's eyes to get, or maybe not a lock. Well, I think so. I mean, honestly, well, we'll get to Group D later on, but I imagine World Elite is the lock in most people's eyes to get out. It doesn't seem unlikely in that instance. So unlike with AHQ, where their team, they're a team that presumably any other team in the playoffs could have potentially gone to Worlds instead of them had they had to go through a regional qualifier instead of qualifying for by points.
Yeah.
Potentially, we could have saw a J team instead of AHQ, and for the first time ever, AHQ would have missed Worlds. That's where I say there's probably stagnation with AHQ. Is you've got this issue. It's the same story, except the other teams in the region are getting better, and you don't know exactly what you're going to be getting into with this team. But
See,
at the same time, maybe them being an underdog gives them a little extra energy. I don't know. I don't really expect good games out of them personally, especially if they're matching up against somebody like SKT.
I definitely don't either, especially with how close the series with J Team was in the playoffs, and they might have went over Rays Gaming 3-1, but they got stomped so hard by Flash Wolves. And by the way, those games in the 3-0 from Flash Wolves to AHQ, the games basically were anywhere between 30 to 32 minutes. They didn't have a large degree of variance at all.
So they're pretty decisive.
They were pretty decisive. From memory, I didn't write down the gold values offhand, but I'm pretty sure it was roughly anywhere between 12 to 15K each game, 30 to 32 minutes each game.
Yeah, that sounds pretty decisive to me. At that point, you have to wonder if AHQ shouldn't have been replaced by another team, but perhaps their region in general wasn't as. I mean, it doesn't seem like their region's as strong as somebody like China, where the top four teams seem pretty dangerous and
Yeah.
also were dangerous to one another. So at that point, the only question we have to ask is, I'm going to get your final predictions in order. You're going to say
All
what,
right.
SKT, C9, EDG, AHQ?
Yeah, I definitely say that, and I want to put the strong emphasis that I'm putting C9 second because I'm kind of betting on Clear Love to not show up. If Clear Love shows up for EDG, I do think EDG takes second. So I'm going to say
Okay.
this all rides on Clear Love. Whether he shows up or not is the deciding factor for who leaves in the second seed. Because I do think that Contracts is a great jungler, and even though he's racked up a very minor amount of experience through the play-ins, I think Clear Love is a veteran, and if he shows up, he has more than enough experience to run circles around any plan that Cloud9 can make. Whether or not the rest of his team can perform up to par with people like Jensen, Impact, Sneaky has been doing relatively well since they've been at Worlds, but then again, that's also against a lower tier of competition, so we have to keep that caveat there. But I do think that C9 is a formidable opponent, and I do think that EDG's success rides on which Clear Love we eventually see.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with EDG above C9 in
All
second
right.
and SKT first. HQ can just keep the last spot warm. The reason why I would put EDG above C9 is in general, I think they're a safer choice to bet on because of the fact that their regional strength indicates that they're holding up pretty well to
Yes.
all opponents, including teams that I would rate much higher than Cloud9 in general, like World Elite, even Invictus Gaming, the fourth seed that never made it, or the fourth best team, I guess, the other
Yeah.
team in the top four, and obviously the RNG, the other team. So I think all three of the Chinese representatives are better than C9, and if all three of them are a bit of a toss-up as to which one would win if they were in a head-to-head, then clearly to me the choice is C9 is not going to be in the same caliber. So I don't think that they're in the discussion in general. Holistically, I don't think they're as good a team. They might have one good matchup with top lane Impact, but I don't really know how good that really is. Especially if you consider like one of the other lanes popping off for EDG. The thing is, the story I've heard from EDG is not really that they're a super explosive team, unless Clear Love potentially does show up. But I haven't really watched too much LPL, so I could just be pulling that one out of my ass. The thing I would say is that probably it doesn't really matter that they're not explosive. They seem to me like a team that, especially if Clear Love's on and doing his smart jungle pathing that he's known for and stealing barons as he's known for,
Yeah.
then they're more like a grinding out the game sort of team. And interestingly enough, now that all of the major regions have dropped best of ones, and I think actually all regions that are competing have dropped best of ones at this point, it'll be interesting to see which team, in general, across all groups, actually comes out ahead in some of these awkward matchups that you're not really 100% sold on each one. Like basically, SKT isn't playing. Okay, well, if no Korean team is playing them, there's no 100% victor. In that case, I think it'll be interesting because nobody has experience with just best of ones. Nobody's still playing that. It's Weird. I wonder. Maybe
except
we should
for
probably
NA next season.
listen. I don't even get into that, man.
All right, another time,
We'll
another
do
time.
a whole video on that one. So yeah, basically, by just an interesting food for thought, something to think about is actually Cloud9 is the only team in this group with best of one experience. So maybe they have an upper hand. Maybe, maybe not. That extolling the virtues of the best of one. They're actually just prepping for they sandbag to get third seed so they'd have the maximum amount of best of one practice before best of one started in NA next season. I'm telling you right now, I'm a legend. So Group B, let's talk Group B.
Group B.
Longju from Korea is the first seed. Big surprise that SKT isn't that one. They, like we said
And
earlier, defeated them 3-1. Immortals, second seed from NA, lost to TSM 3-1 as well. And Fnatic, the third seed from Europe, they qualified. They actually also have best of one experience. They qualified through the play-ins, defeated. Or wait. Oh yeah, never mind. I was misreading these notes. Yeah, they
oh,
defeated
my bad.
HK. No, it's
HKA,
not.
yep.
It's not you. It's because H2K is who they defeated in the gauntlet, and then they fought HKA. I was like, what the
Yep.
fuck? So yeah, they
I,
advanced the groups that way, and then we've got the Gigabyte Marines, aka TSM's Kryptonite
yeah, more
from
or less.
Vietnam from the GPL. So they secured a spot in the group stage. They like auto qualified. Basically, a spot for their region was secured
Yeah.
based on their MSI performance. So what wound up happening is the top team from GPL would immediately qualify, sort of like the auto qualification system for the wildcard teams before the play-in stage was developed. So basically, it's how all the other teams qualified, except this time it was based on MSI performance. So they were seeded automatically as a pool 3 seed, and they'll probably remain on the bottom, in my estimation. But we'll talk about that now. So, who do you expect to
Ooh.
get out of here first?
Let
In
me
first
tell
place.
you, this is probably my I'm gonna say second favorite group, but by a very narrow margin, because this is gonna be the one that produces the most exciting games. And I mean exciting for a number of reasons. Fnatic, definitely known for early game. They always love to play the early game. They're not strangers to having the four-man dive around level 6, depending on if they get their hands on things like Elise or Shen. Um, IMT, not a stranger to this either. From North America, they've been pulling out these shenanigans this last split as well. And each of these teams is really good at it. Gigabyte Marines as a whole showed a lot of promise around MSI, even if they weren't able to get out of the double round robin in the first time around to get into like the playoff portion. But either way, they have explosive early game. They're not afraid to do strategies that aren't even a part of the meta. And when we saw them at MSI, they definitely impressed. I do think that they have an advantage in this group for one reason and one reason only. Levi, their jungler. I don't think Gigabyte Marines gets out, but I do think Levi as a jungler is better than Xmithy. I do think that he is better than Broxa. Whether or not Gigabyte Marines utilize him across the team and across the map efficiently is something we've yet to see because it's been a whole split, and admittedly, I don't even get to watch all the major regions, so I cannot speak to the regional impact that Levi had in those games for the summer split in the GPL. But ultimately, number one is going to be Longju. I think that's undeniable. They as a unit just have so much more experience. If we go role for role, we have to think about who's going to possibly contend with Longju. If we start even with Prey and Gorilla, I think the only case we could make is maybe Reckless is reasonable enough to stand with Prey, and not even for the duration of an entire game. But Reckless has been undoubtedly a top 2 AD carry out of EU this split. He had some of the highest numbers. He's been the mainstay that Fnatic kind of build compositions around, and admittedly, they shifted to more on-meta things halfway through the summer, and the team, it looked like they kind of struggled to find identity with that, but it always comes back to Reckless being able to do more damage, and sometimes they'll shift off the draft a little bit, and they'll give Cap something like a Syndra, or so as something like a carry top, something like a Gnar, and they all perform really admirably on that, but I don't think, say for instance, like Soaz or Flame from IMT, I don't think they'll stand up to like Khan. I don't really know how the mid lane will play, but I do feel like BDD's style so far in the framework of Longzhu gaming, which has been primarily like the Scalio and the Talia, these champs that have this wave clear and can roam across the map pretty efficiently, and support fellow teammates through that roaming through the Galio ulti with reduced resistances onto like Prey, or depending on who they have on a carry, even Khan if he needs it. Him in that framework, on top of first of all having the highest KDA in the summer split, while still pumping out damage on champions like Galio, that's just impressive. And while I do think Pobelter is really mechanically inclined, he actually finished, I believe, in a Challenger on the LCK ladder with like 600 points. So we know he's coming into this with his mechanics in line. We know Caps is a player that we could expect a lot of good plays from, even from his debut. People still cite that play, Syndra versus Ryze, when he was versing G2 Perks. We can expect good things from these players, but BDD is going to shove that wave and be team assist. And I don't know if in the best of one setting they will enable BDD to play any of his assassins that he was known for, especially since during the summer split he actually has pretty bad statistics on them. But he's going to push the wave. He's going to roam around. He's going to enable Longzhu. Nobody's really going to contend with Prey and Gorilla. Definitely not Cody Sun and Ole. Not to discredit them, they've grown a lot. But Prey and Gorilla, they're beasts of their own. You need to pray that you can beat them and hope that you're a stronger beast than a gorilla. Let me put it that way, all right? Not to make the bad joke, but
I mean, you had a perfect setup for a good one back when you were. I thought you were going to come right out, spitting straight fire right out the gate. We're talking about. No, talking not even that. Talking about when you said BDD is going to shove. You said that lane. I thought you were going to say shove their shit in. They're going to get their shit pushed. I was like, whoa. But you didn't do it.
Honestly, it's a missed opportunity. But you know what? I won't miss the next opportunity. You know why? Because I'm a fanatic with good wordplay. Good wordplay is immortal. No. All right, let's get back to the task at hand.
Downvote this video.
Yeah, right?
So,
don't even let it see the light of day.
You think Longzhu's number one, but out of...
Yes, absolutely.
I'll put it to you this way, right? Instead of asking second place, I'm going to ask who Gigabyte Marines is going to embarrass and put in the fourth place slot.
I think that's really tough to say.
Is it going to be the NA team or is it going to be the EU team?
I actually do think that Gigabyte Marines will still end up fourth in the long run. And it's not to any weakness of their own. I actually think that this group is going to be highly competitive with the teams that are in it, with the exception of Longzhu. Longzhu maybe has the potential to drop like one off game, maybe, but I still think the odds of that are really, really low. All things considered, like I said, the pieces across the board are not there. Like, IMT is not going to go pound for pound with Longzhu. Fnatic is not going to go pound for pound with Longzhu. And Gigabyte Marines, just not counting Levi, I don't believe that the rest of their players are up to par. Because the top lane is stacked. We have Khan, we have Soaz, we have Flame. The mid lane is stacked. We have BDD, Pobelter, Caps. I don't see Optimus shaping up to that.
Probably not.
If Gigabyte Marines takes a game off of anybody, I hate to say this, but I do think it'll be Immortals. And the only reason I say that is because I feel Fnatic as a unit have had far more time adapting. They took their loss in playoffs to heart, and they changed their mentality to only focus on moving forward. So it seems like they have the framework.
You mean they're not picking Twitch and fucking Kennen for Reckless? That's not happening anymore? Thank
Honestly,
the Lord.
They haven't done it for a little bit. To be fair, if it's best of one games, I wouldn't be surprised if draft allowed for the flexibility for them to try to pull it out for one game if they felt so inclined.
Those champions should just be banned from Fnatic games automatically, honestly, at this point, for the viewers' sake.
Yeah, it's...
All right, so we've got... So you think that Immortals is the only team the GAM could upset? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think there's a higher likelihood of them upsetting Immortals than Fnatic. Because Fnatic, I just think as a unit, they're a lot stronger. Which isn't to say IMT is weak, but I think that, Xmithy still has some obvious flaws. We saw in the finals versus TSM that he whiffed the Sejuani ultimate still, that there are some times where his smites are not necessarily on point, and somebody else on his team has to actually secure the neutral objective. And it's during moments that could be game-changing, right? So if Xmithy's on point, then there's a lower frequency of that. Also, IMT's bot lane, I think, is going to be a little exploitable. Like I said, you're not going to... Cody Sun's not going to measure up to Prey or Reckless, in my opinion. Ole, we can make a case for that he's amongst the better supports, but at the same time, you still have to carry the weight of Cody Sun, which means at the very minimum, IMT either have to draft around that and plan for an 80 carry that gives them easier access or more support for the rest of the team. Maybe like Zaya for additional CC, because Cody Sun's actually played that before. Maybe Tristana, because as she levels up, you get a lot of range and you're hyper carry. There are ways to draft around the weakness and shore it up, but I do believe that teams like Longzhu and Fnatic are definitely poised to draft something to counter even lane safety. And since these teams are really keen on doing the four-man dive, I don't believe there's any degree of safety that anyone can draft, barring a Kalista and Thresh maybe, that could keep the bot lane safe from any one of the rest of them. So it's really going to come down to like map pressure, definitely from the junglers. And this is why I think Gigabyte Marines actually have the advantage with Levi, because even Longzhu, the strongest team, their weakest component is Cuz. Anytime Longzhu seems to have a weakness or something going wrong in a match, it's like Cuz getting a little pressured early. He might be out of position. He might not be in the proper position to capitalize on the enemy's movements or tracking the enemy efficiently. Which isn't to say he's a bad player. I still think Cuz is one of the better junglers here, but he is not in like a top three. I would even say it's suspect to put him as like fifth. Maybe he's like at the sixth slot, but I definitely don't think he's a top tier jungler like that. So ultimately, I'd say Longzhu, Fnatic, actually, I'll put over Immortals, then Immortals, then Gigabyte Marines.
I think that's pretty fair. Given the idea that you've got to, I mean, the handicap that they were playing around with Immortals versus TSM in those finals, having Cody Sun as your 80 carry, try winning a finals in any region.
To be fair, I have to give him some credit because if you, and again,
No,
I'm not gonna say
you
I'm not gonna
don't.
say that he's a great ADC, but if we look at when he first started playing, and then look at him now, he's definitely made marked improvements. He's not. I'm still definitely not going to say he's like a top. He's not a top three ADC in North America. So let alone making him even like a top 10 ADC at Worlds is absolutely bizarre. But I do think that he is reasonably talented, and he has a lot of room to grow. I just don't think he's going to contend with the AD carries at Worlds.
Listen, when you were bronze, you were reasonably talented and
No.
had a lot of room to grow.
To be fair, I was never
Look,
bronze.
guys, I'm
Thank God.
silver now. I can go to the
Yeah.
finals. Come on, man. We can't give him all the credit. Can't give him credit for being a serviceable player that only mostly shits the bed on important moments.
I'll give him credit for
Gotta put
going
some
from.
pressure on the guy.
I'll give him.
Unfortunately, he can't even do that because then he crumbles, as we saw in the finals.
That's fair.
So
That's fair. He definitely could have showed up more. I just want to give him the credit for moving from shit tier to manageable to serviceable. But he does still have ways to go to be considered a very talented AD carry.
yeah, well, that's the thing. Is memes aside, serviceable versus other NA teams that aren't named TSM.
Exactly.
So teams below them in the ranking, he's mitigated in his amount of damage that he can do against his own team.
Definitely.
it's not a self-repairing solution. He needs a little love from a Korean coach or something. I don't know. One not named Loco Doco, since we all know
well,
how
they
he
do
loves.
have Coach Song, who is a Korean coach.
Oh, well,
and
there you go.
Maybe that's why he improved a little bit. Who knows?
Yeah, well, Koreans are the masters of everything, so well, we got that out of the way. Speaking of Koreans being the masters of everything, the third Korean seed coming out of groups into Group C, the third seed from Korea is Samsung Galaxy first. Then following them is RNG from China, second seed. G2 from Europe, the first seed, and 1907 Fenerbahce Ispor from Turkey, who managed to get out of the play-in stage in a 3-0 over Team 1 from Brazil.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's those are those teams. Do you all agree with the consensus that Samsung will be the first seed out of this group, even though they're the third seed from Korea?
All right. So I do believe that they're going to finish first seed. I do not believe it's going to be pretty. And I say that because, all right, so their team cohesion is really great with ambition, right? However, they're more notably a late game team. They come together, they form Voltron in the mid to late game. Let's put it that way, right? So they usually dominate almost any late game scenario, to my knowledge. And this is going to be tricky because this is a group where we have two teams that just progressively do better the later the game gets in Samsung and G2 as well. Then we have RNG, who tend to be an early game powerhouse. So I can see a lot of variance here, and I like to call it that rock paper scissors scenario, where it's like RNG being an early game team could take games off of like G2 or Samsung Galaxy if they snowball out of control. Likewise, if a game stalls out long enough, then that lead might not matter versus either of those teams. And Samsung Galaxy, G2, they notably know how to play from behind. They know how to just kind of stagnate the game, get farm. G2 specifically have the strategy of, you know what, if Perks doesn't win the early mid game, get farm on this event, and then play the late game, and then win anyway. That's usually how they like to handle their games in the long run. They do have pretty
Yeah,
superior.
Fnatic sounds like a great. Oh wait, you're talking about
Uh,
G2. Oh.
yeah, basically, it's of a similar strategy, except they're. Well, actually, now that you say that, they're pretty
It's the
damn
same
similar.
strategy.
Damn.
It's the same exact one. Interesting.
All
But
right.
I mean, I think G2 as a whole seems to have a much stronger roster than Fnatic, and that's probably
Yes. Yes.
pretty obvious given the fact that they're the first seed and not the third.
Absolutely.
So go ahead. Go ahead. Keep going. Let's hear the rest.
Ultimately, I just think that, like, say in a match, a war of attrition between Samsung Galaxy and G2, I think goes in the favor of Samsung Galaxy,
Right.
and I put that more in. It is definitely more of the case because if we look at this recent summer, we know Ambition has shown up when he plays. Trick, more often than Ambition has been to Samsung, Trick to G2 has been responsible for some pretty bad early games. And be it not frequent, it's more likely to happen. So I do think Trick is a bit of a variable, and G2's success will depend, much like I think that EDG's success will depend on Clearlove's performance, G2's success will depend on which Trick shows up. I think Perks is absolutely going to do fine standing against the likes of like Xiaohu and Crown. Crown notably is a player that I want to keep an eye on because last Worlds he was a monster. Since then he hasn't achieved that same peak, and I'm really hoping that he matches that again because the mechanical prowess he showed at last Worlds, first of all, enough to have Samsung reach the finals, which is not to take away credit from the rest of the roster because they were all gifted as well. But Crown was a mainstay. He was someone who could get. Samsung brings Crown to late game, Crown brings Samsung to victory. And a lot of the time, that's how it will work. Rula
And
has been
double lift
notably.
to tears.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, if you walked into a Victor Laser, I guess you would cry too. But, that's just how that goes. Now,
I mean, good game design, really, is what I'm saying, right? I just had a
it's great.
revelation, actually. The thing is, you know how they say that there's truth in every lie?
All
There's
right.
like a hint of truth to every lie.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think that there's an even bigger hint of truth in every meme. So every meme that Reddit spouts about double lift running into a Victor laser or fucking Trick feeding his ass off in the early game, and or brother Sven, right? Same thing, but for TSM. These are actually like the more we see this in Twitch chat and on Reddit and all these other places of incredibly sophisticated conversation at
Absolutely.
lightning speed. The more we see that, the more true it is. So that's it. That's the secret to League of Legends analysis. We just need to go visit the top 10 Reddit pages related, even loosely related to esports or players on r/League of Legends, and just read the comments, sort by top or sort by most popular. I don't know, whatever the system they have going on over there, and then we just read that and transcribe them into notes, and then just obviously don't credit anybody that posted it because
Absolutely
I
not.
mean it's clearly a truth that doesn't just belong to them. I mean, it's not like they put any effort into copying and pasting it themselves from somebody else. So I mean, we don't
I
have to do
mean,
that either.
possession is 9/10 of the law, and once you transcribe the meme, I mean, isn't it yours?
I mean, honestly, if you think about the way that the current political climate is heading in America, I think that, to be honest, I think we should all just start donning black bandanas and rating anybody who thinks differently from us. And I mean, honestly, if you don't think that socialism is the right way to go for memes, meme socialism, if that's not the right way for the empire of Keck or whatever the fuck people are talking about now, then honestly, you're just you're a racist transphobe and you should be silenced. Your freedom of speech, not for you. Anyways, back to Group C. So we have
You saying
Samsung.
you were speaking about the political climate, by the way, and I just wanted to say, what does trump that is my ratings for the my ratings for the members of Group C. You know what I'm
All
saying?
right. Well, I'm gonna have to build a wall between you and puns at this point.
Yeah, I know, right? You got to keep me away from them. I'm really bad at them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's honestly, I think it's going to be a repeat of last year. I think it's going to be Samsung Galaxy and RNG ultimately. I do feel like the tools that are at RNG's disposal just kind of nullify the advantages that G2 has. I think Uzi can stand up reasonably well to Sven. Um, the same way that Sven can be given all sorts of advantages and then carry up the late game. I do think that Uzi does it reasonably well, and we saw even from last year's Worlds that Uzi is capable of, even on a low damage champion last year on like Ezreal, getting sufficient DPS down early. Getting, I would say, optimal DPS down actually, because he did end up getting that triple kill like before 10 minutes. It was absolutely ridiculous.
I mean,
He
TSM did literally throw themselves underneath their tower and flail around like monkeys. So
All right, fair
I
enough,
could
fair
get
enough.
that triple kill. I mean, come on, I'm Reddit
All right, you
challenger.
got it, you got it, you got it. I do think that that RNG though have just better tools all around the board. I think Xiaohu has been a rock for RNG during an entire season where they had basically a revolving door of members in multiple positions. They had Xiaohu that was continuously there and putting out damage at different points. When Uzi was on the team, he was getting less resources, still putting out damage, still winning his lane. When they swapped out Uzi for the other AD carry, whose name eludes me at the moment, Xiaohu got a little more
Not Uzi.
resources, but what?
Not Uzi. Whoever it
Not
is.
Uzi, when not Uzi was on the lineup, then
There you go.
Xiaohu got more resources and still did damage. When Uzi came back, got a little less resources, still did damage. He plays a magnificent part for them, and I do think that the early game pressure that MLXG can supply for these dominant laners is going to be a setup that's kind of similar to how Longzhu would want to play, except MLXG has much more aggression than Cuz does. It's like Cuz is more supportive. MLXG is I'll set you up for the kill, if that makes a reasonable distinction.
Yeah.
So, but
No,
I
totally.
do
That makes
think
sense.
that, let me just say, by the way, Fenerbahce is just dead in the water. We've seen them play the entire time up until now. They have issues sometimes in the mid to late game. They consistently had issues closing out games, and against the likes of G2 and Samsung Galaxy, who are late game monsters, there is not a shot in hell at all for Fenerbahce to get out of this group. I do not believe it. Let me put it this way. They're frozen in fourth place. How about that one, all right? They're going to crash and burn.
All right. Well, I was frozen today. We've got that's a reference nobody will get. So G2 is not getting out of this group. Started the
No.
TSM curse from last year's Worlds. Basically NA greater than EU lol. So we can just move on. I agree with your prediction basically. I don't think G2 is going to be able to do anything here. Although if they play better than they played last Worlds, which should not be a real challenge,
Yeah.
since ultimately I think this Samsung is not as good as last year's Rocks. This RNG, I mean, it's better than, what was it, CLG they were in a group with last time? So it's sort of a toss-up as to how
Oh,
much
yeah, that's
the
right.
difference was in turn. Like honestly, that last year's group was a fucking fiasco. I
Yeah,
could
because
not believe that Albus Nox Luna said LOL and got their way out of the group somehow. How the fuck did that happen? Where CLG and G2 both get tossed out of that group.
honestly, to think about the fact that two major region teams can go there, and then you have the likes of Albus, Nox, Luna, just the wild card team. Nobody really anticipated too much from them at the start,
Well, that was the
and
problem. Nobody prepped.
I
So,
guess that had to be it. At the end of the day, they showed up. They even Rocks Tigers dropped the game to them.
hey
You know what
man,
I'm saying?
I
Like,
think that's the thing though, is that I mean we've been through all of the teams with wild card, all of the groups rather with wild card teams so far, and not one of them we've predicted to even come close to third place, let alone fourth. So I don't really think there's much of a chance that we see another crazy upset like Albus Nox had. I
no.
don't know if Albus Nox is markedly better as a team than any of the other wild cards we have here.
Hmm.
I don't think that even after we've seen what happened with Albus Nox, where they upset those other major region teams, I don't even think something like that could happen. Not just because it has happened in the past. So now teams are going to look and see, well, maybe these teams are actual threats and maybe over prepare perhaps, as opposed to under prepare, which is still better, I guess, unless you drop a team to a team that you could have drop a game to a team you could have prepared better for, whatever. But I still don't think that even if they don't prepare for this team, I don't think Fenerbahce has a chance in hell of beating Samsung Galaxy or I'll never
No.
give up. They would have to, they themselves would have to prepare way more than the other team would have to not prepare for them in order for an
Yeah.
upset to happen.
It
So
would
it's
have to be
pretty.
pretty
Unlikely.
specific. So, like an earthquake would have to strike wherever G2, RNG, and Samsung are staying. Like, that's how you get out first if you're Fenerbahce, all right? By default, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
But I don't think anything that earth-shattering will occur. They'll
Fucking hell.
perhaps they could take one game somewhere. I'll give them a little credit for the fact that Frozen's really good. Crash for being an emergency sub is meshed really well for the team. Japone I think is Fenerbahce, right? The support for them, I
You know
believe.
more than I do.
They're, all right. Well, this support player had been adopting different picks, right? I know for a fact that the casters made it a point to reference that they played mostly melee, mainly engage style, and then
Okay.
they were whipping out things like Jana for their team and whatnot. So there's some expansion there, but I don't think that fixes overarching issues that they have in that mid to late game, and ultimately that's why they'll falter to G2, to RNG, to Samsung
I mean, yeah,
Galaxy.
that's literally the strength of every other team. So if they can't grind, it's much like all of the other wildcard teams. It's the same story we've heard. If they can't grind out an advantage early on, if they can't
Yeah.
really take one really early and catch them with their pants down, basically, and then snowball that to a full lead before the other team has time to wake up and do damage control, then I mean, they're really not going to be able to actually take a game, it doesn't seem, or even get much of a lead at all. If they can't get that early, it's unlikely that Samsung Galaxy, famed champions of the late game, are able to take SKT to 5 games, and one of which was like a 60-minute game or something ridiculous. You're not going to see Fenerbahce doing the same thing to them, you know. So
No, definitely not.
I don't think that they have much of a chance. So yeah, I think I also agree that G2 doesn't really have the tools necessary for RNG. I mean, it really is just bad luck at this point that they got this group draw, and part
Yeah.
of it is Korean dominance, and part of it is Chinese parity, and part of it is G2 just being, uh, well, it's like they're probably one of the better Western teams to come to the tournament, but they also
Definitely.
wound up rolling into a group with 2 final bosses, basically.
Yeah.
So
But you know
it's
what?
pretty unlikely that those teams will get out.
We're jumping from 2 final bosses to no final boss. You know what I'm saying? Uh,
Hey, man.
Group D's.
TSM, TSM. Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah. We get it. We heard you.
this is the best chance they'll ever have, and people might hate me
Really,
for
you
it.
think so?
I'm saying it
I don't even
loosely.
think Okay, well, listen. I'm just gonna get it right out over with. I don't think TSM's getting out of this group.
All right, you can go ahead. You know what? Open up. Tell me why. What's got you so
So
firm
World
in this?
Elite's, I think World Elite's first, based on what I've seen of them, based on the
Okay.
research I've done for the article I'm writing, based on all this other stuff. We've already talked about Chinese parity earlier in the episode.
Yes.
And I think this group, even before World Elite came in, it was a toss-up actually whether or not TSM would even make top 2 out of Misfits and Flash Wolves. I think they're handily better than Flash Wolves and Misfits on a good day. But if
Hmm.
they, I guess I'll say this, right? I don't think there's no way TSM will get out of this group. If they do get out, I don't know if it'll be first, because I think World Elite's handily better than them. But TSM really is like tilted since MSI. That's their acronym. Whenever it comes to Worlds, they're always like, they get fucked. The first what's it called? The first game of the day that they play, if they lose or they have a bad start, then usually they don't win other games. We've seen this for the past like 2 years, 3 years with this team. And if they win the first game, usually they don't win the next game. It's like a weird trend. So basically, they never do damage control since actually the first MSI. That I've never seen them do damage control and do better the second day of groups. They always do really bad the first day of groups and then say, "Holy shit, it's the 11th hour. We have to win all of our games now." And then they don't. And then they
It
don't get out. So like maybe they
honestly.
take one game in the first day and then they take no games the next day, or only one game and they needed 2 or something else like that, and they're fucked and they can't get out, or they get screwed by stupid tiebreaker rules, which admittedly is retarded. Like the whole idea of a tiebreaker to me is like, oh, we have to find out who's the better team, and you can't just say there's no tiebreaker rule because they have the head-to-head, because the idea is
Yeah.
that you, in my opinion, the idea is that it's a competition against the teams in your group, not just one team. So it's like, did you play the field? Are you markedly better? Like, to me, it seems kind of goofy that they had that head-to-head issue. But I understand it's a carryover from everywhere else. So it's sort of like unrealistic, I guess, to expect Riot to all. Well, it's for Riot being
Yeah.
Riot. It's unrealistic for them to actually alter any of their ideas. But ultimately, I do actually think that TSM at least I feel like they actually have a higher chance of not getting out of this group than analysts were predicting them last year, where everybody said, "Oh, TSM first." You
Oh,
know, like I feel like at this point they have a higher chance based on predictions, based on what we can observe, they have a higher chance of failing this year, which is really weird because it's you got to do so much weird like fucking mental gymnastics to get yourself in a position where you can understand TSM was really good last year, but they shit the bed. This year TSM's not looking really good, but they're also not against as many teams, like as good teams. So it's just fucked. Like it's really a weird situation that's impossible for me to articulate right now because I'm not as well spoken as certain British individuals. So I guess what we'll say is wrecked lol, and then you can talk.
All right. Honestly, I find it interesting because I have a different take on the group. And my initial opinion of the group, I actually started factoring in World Elite a part of Group D since somebody wrote the article suggesting that would make it the best group. And my
Mhm.
initial reaction was actually World Elite followed by Misfits, believe it or not. And I'll explain why that is in a second. But after
That's
World,
exactly my placement, actually.
oh, excellent, we're on the same page. We didn't even know it. But
Yeah.
so I'm not a misfit. Look at that.
Wow. Now you are. I'm voting Flash Wolves. Fuck this.
Right? Yeah, right. Um, so World Elite, their performance bothered me a little bit because even though they did win the games to get into groups, I believe they won the series 3-0.
Mhm.
Who was that against? That was against Young Generation. I
I
do
mean,
feel
yeah, they
like
weren't tested at all in the group stage, basically. Well, I guess Lion Gaming sort of tested them in the plans, but tested them in the sense I think it's more likely to. You can predict World Elite. I mean, I think you can say that it's more likely that World Elite underprepared in the same way that Rocks underprepared for Albus Nox Luna back last year.
yeah,
Uh, and as opposed to saying World Elite was actually like tested by Lion and they prepared for them. You know, I maybe not. I mean, that's like an unknowable. I
yeah, that's
think that I
something
would
we'll
write
never know.
that shakiness off versus Lion specifically as they didn't expect them to be as good as they were, as opposed to they did expect them to be it, and Lion actually were that good
Well,
because
it was
they
suspect
were
to me.
dispatched handily afterwards. So
My bad. It was suspect to me because of the fact that World Elite. I should stop saying that. Team WE,
mhm.
as they are known as. Shame on me. Uh, they shown some suspect drafting. Like they did have a team composition that was against Lion Gaming and it had like a Cho'Gath and a Janna and no hard engage, I believe, outside of like a Corki package and a Gragas ultimate, if that counts. If that counts, like, and that was the stretch of it. And I felt like while this composition is good to stop dive, it's very anti-dive, right? It's very zone control. If you're running towards them, then you're running towards a Cho'Gath, and if you're trying to force an engage, then Janna can reset the fight. Alternatively, Gragas can then set up the pick, Corki can then like zone off an area, whatever the case may be. But it's very reliant on people trying to go into you, or you're trying to get a pick. And
Mhm.
to me that feels really weird because it does give them a lot of tools in terms of like sieging until super late game when Cho'Gath can literally ignore a tower, and then Janna could kind of like prep up a tornado, shield them. Gragas can prep an ulti. This way, like they could just forcefully disengage everybody off of a tower. But it made for really awkward scenarios early mid game because it made them abusable in the sense that they couldn't force any pace. They couldn't forcefully take a tower. They couldn't situate around an objective and hope to take it because the Cho'Gath wasn't in the position where he was tanky enough for it to matter yet. On top of that, they just played the early game pretty poorly. They suffered deficits at I shouldn't say deficits. They fell behind pace of the game a few times, but they still maintain gold advantages despite kill disparities in a few of their games. So I do think their macro is good, but I think it does show and highlight a weakness for other teams that have great macro to punish them early. Because these are wildcard teams they were playing against. They could get abused in kills early, but have better macro because they're playing in a region that dictates better play on the whole. And like we were talking about the parity between the top tier teams, there's a lot of you could swap any of them out. The macro is really good for a majority of them. And World Elite, WE, they just showed really good prowess in terms of the macro and the late game specifically. But I think a team like Misfits, who actually has Max Lore doing a lot of work in the early game. Power of Evil is very lane dominant. He's able to take a lead if he accrues one and stretch it out into the late game. I do think that Alfari is a very formidable top laner, and I'm calling it now. This is the Worlds where he cements himself as a high caliber top laner, and I mean across the world, not just in EU. This is going to be the Worlds. This is going to be where he pops off. He's going to cement his title, guaranteed. And against, look at, this is my issue, I guess. I have so many things boiling in my head right now. I can't even get them all out. If we look at top lane, Misfits has literally the best top laner, in my opinion. Haunter is probably the close second. 957 is not the carry for WE. MMD is definitely not the carry for Flash Wolves. The
He's the carry for
closest,
the other team.
basically. The closest thing that we can say here when it comes down to it is Misfits' early game team. TSM is good scaling into the late game, but sometimes their macro can be suspect under very specific conditions. Svenskeren can be a variable. Flash Wolves as a whole comes from a region that looks like it's weaker, but they 3-0'd AHQ, which is supposedly the second strongest team, so it bodes well to say that they are leagues above the rest of their competition. If you ignore the regular split.
Yeah, well, most people will because they won't remember or have seen it, like me.
Yeah. But
I think the issue is Alfari is definitely the best top laner in this group. I think hands down. I don't think that the Panzer is really that close of a second from what I've seen of this guy. So if they play well around him, the other issue is this is basically Unicorns of Love with upgraded macro and upgraded individual players. You got Power of Evil, Power of fucking Evil. I mean, how many times has this guy beaten Bjergsen? How many times has Bjergsen got up against this guy and got absolutely trounced? I mean, it's as if Power of Evil shaved off 3/4 of his mustache in specific areas and started throwing his arm around like that dog on that YouTube video.
Oh,
and this guy's, I mean, he's from, what else did you expect me to say? Honestly, at this point, Power of Evil seems like the hard counter to Bjergsen based on all the other international competition they've ever been at. So for me, assuming that hasn't gone away, assuming it wasn't actually because of Unicorns of Love's jungle pressure or some other map movement or something else that caught Bjergsen off guard when they played, the head-to-head matchup, I think Misfits has a distinct advantage over TSM from the top lane, probably from the mid lane, which is one of the only instances where you'll ever hear anybody say a team is better than TSM in a head-to-head matchup in the mid lane. And I think with Svenskeren being variable, if he plays like he did against MLXG last year's Worlds in that first game where he was Lee Sin into Hecarim, that was fucking beautiful to watch, man. At that point, he was not brother Sven, he was Uncle Sven, and he had the belt. But unless he has that belt on, unless he's your uncle, he turns into your brother. I mean, you're just gonna, who the fuck is this? You're gonna boss him around a little bit, you're gonna start rolling him around. Yeah, go do my homework, do my laundry, whatever. And I don't know what you do with, submissive younger brothers, but that's basically what brother Sven would be like in my head. Just this big guy, but he doesn't really know how to use any of his good parts. He like sort of fell asleep in the head a little bit, but he's still awake. You know what I mean?
Yeah. On the topic of Sven, though, this group in particular is stacked when it comes to junglers. To be honest, I mean, Svenskeren can be high or low, but then you have the likes of Karsa, you have the likes of Maxlore, who tends to do a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely.
He can do some counter jungling, early vision, and whatnot.
I mentioned Svenskeren as a variable jungler because of exactly this point, is because against World Elite and Misfits, he can either pop off like he did against Hecarim, MLXG's Hecarim in Game 1 of last year's Worlds, but if he doesn't go that hard, I don't see him making up for the deficiencies across the board other places. Hanser will be probably on par with 957, or maybe he'll work to get some advantage and solo kill him. I don't know. It doesn't seem like 957 is anything but a stable player, so I don't know that he'll be bullied unless he becomes overconfident himself. And maybe the home field advantage might give him a little jitters, but 957's been around for a hot minute, this guy. I don't think he's going to be like, perturbed too much, especially against TSM or like world-renowned chokers on Worlds at this fucking point. So the only team I think TSM is handily better than is maybe Flash Wolves. I will retract my statement earlier. I think I may have said that they were like Flash Wolves could beat them. I think it's uncertain. I don't think it's as certain as a matchup as people might be thinking. But at the same time, it's hard to gauge Flash Wolves' actual strength relative to their group, given the fact that they 3-0'd AHQ. And you can say that, maybe there's handily better than AHQ by a long mile because of this 3-0. But they've never really been tested. They didn't even play in like the play-ins or anything. They don't have any international experience since MSI, I believe, where they were a disappointment. So I don't know, man. I think that TSM could be looking at third, maybe even fourth in this group, depending on if which Flash Wolves show up. But I definitely think it's actually lower, like less chance for them to get out. I think Misfits have what it takes. Ironically, G2 is probably again showing the sort of randomness, the random element of the group
Yeah,
draw.
yeah.
The G2 seems to be a lock for not getting out based on our estimation, whereas Misfits actually seems more likely to get out than TSM. And Misfits has obviously lost to G2 themselves 3-1 in the finals, I believe, or was it 3-0?
I think it was
It was
3-0.
3-0. Yeah, it was a clean sweep. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty funny, but if that happens, but I don't really see a way. I see a way out for TSM in its second place, and it's
Yeah.
narrowly beating Misfits in some of their games while also prepping enough for Flash Wolves to handily defeat them. But I know TSM's coaching a little bit, and I have a feeling that they're also going to be preparing for World Elite to try and beat them, which could end up really well or could be fucking disastrous and wind up them tilting back to off the face of the planet, just like Doublelift flashing into a Victor or whatever the hell he did, and or is dashing,
Walked
just
right
dashing
into the
into a
laser,
Victor. Yeah, yeah.
right into the damn thing. Like, honestly,
So
I think
that's
our
the thing. I mean, that's the problem right there. Is that they get overconfident. They try to overcompensate for the some advantage that they had after fighting what they know is a team that builds up strength the longer the game goes, and they think I can do one more, and then they die miserably, and or one of them dies miserably, and Bjergsen starts pinging missing over Doublelift's corpse, and then the whole team falls apart. I mean, there was that mad excuse that fucking Bjergsen is sick. Oh, I'm sick. I can't speak.
oh,
Well, yeah,
I
maybe that is the case, but come the fuck on, man. That's like every single thing in the book of maladies has to go right for TSM to not get out of groups. It seems every single fucking year.
do
How
you
does
remember
that
that
happen?
interview, by the way? Did you ever see that? I believe it was like a something Thor did where he had Amazing on, and Amazing was like, if this would have
Oh
been different, and
yeah.
this would have been different, and this would have been different,
If we could
TSM.
only get 3 other wins against 3 different teams that were
Yeah.
obviously better than us, and we could have gone to semis, man. I'm telling you. Fuck on.
Since you were talking about maladies and everything, so
Yeah,
that was a
yeah,
great
absolutely.
great thing.
So yeah,
Honestly,
World Elite Misfits are probably out then.
my prediction is the same as yours. I'm gonna leave room for a little variance between TSM and Misfits because I account for the unknown such as boot camping, scrimmages, etc., etc. I don't really know who's coming in with the best prep and whatnot. It'll come down a lot to who prep better. It'll come down to has the better pick ban, and obviously execution is a no-brainer. I just think that both of these teams will execute well enough. So ultimately, I lean towards Misfits the same way that I lean towards Cloud9 in Group A, but I wouldn't be surprised if TSM came out second. I just think that Misfits have the better tool. So my bold predictions here is that in a matchup between TSM and Misfits, TSM will make the mistake of giving Power of Evil Orianna, in which case Power of Evil will proceed to steal a Baron, and then Misfits will reverse that game. That's my bold prediction for Group D.
So we have it. That's it. Leo has predicted that Cloud9 will advance once again instead of TSM. Fuck. I mean, it couldn't be more scripted at this point. But unlike this talk show, which was pretty clearly not scripted, we care about the cold hard facts, and we never script anything, and we always make sure that our shows are as raw as possible. Unlike LCS, unlike even Worlds, as we see. And if the script comes true, if what we're professing now turns into scripting, that'll be some weird like eighth dimensional chess we're playing too. But I guess we'll just head on back, obviously, for a second episode after these groups end. But the I think it'll be interesting. I think that I don't think anything we've said based on the analysis that we have is like too absurd. I think might shock some people. Obviously, neither of us
Yeah.
having TSM come out of Group D, and one of us having C9 out of Group A. I mean, there's some
Yeah.
head turners, but I think we've explained ourselves candidly enough and concisely enough that it makes enough sense. So unless you have anything to add, I'm gonna go ahead and close this out.
Honestly, the only things that I would think to add is looking forward to Khan tearing up some fools. Looking forward to Alfari tearing up some fools. Want to see me some Levi. He kills Titans. Let's see if he could do it again over in Group B.
Yeah, we never actually talked about Khan, but I guess he's the player to watch there. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of top lane focus on this tournament actually. Khan and Alfari and Well, you can watch Mouse die a lot, I guess, so that's something. But yeah, I think that's pretty good first show. Leave your feedback below. This has been League of Our Own. We'll be back roughly a week from now to wreck ourselves on our incorrect predictions and laugh at Cloud9 after they completely shit the bed and don't make it out.
Yeah,
Bye.
when they're fourth.
Exactly.